out talking about them. So we're going to start out talking about cloud operations. And before we get into the details of the model, let's talk about it in the context of traditional IT. So customers often they assume that cloud operations on the cloud are the same or as on premises, and that's not really how it works. So there's this idea that you need to kind of sacrifice, and we're going to show you how you can maintain security, automation, and scale through cloud operation services in the cloud. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is enabling that governance. That's the first thing we want to do, and it's extremely important for customers that have thousands of applications running in the cloud. So we're going to start with enabling control or guardrails. What happens is this puts those guardrails in place to avoid situations before they have the ability to happen. Okay, let me just go ahead and through. So this is the rest of the model. So basically, in the sustain, build, and there's also operate. We're going to get into the services that enable you to do these things. Things like enabling those guardrails, remediating automatically without having to have human intervention, and also operating at scale. So the way that we do this is by using a model that we call the 3 lines of defense, which is what you see on the screen. And what the 3 lines of defense does is it helps simplify what services to use for which portion of compliance. So in the first line, we have implement risk management. So you see there we have services like Control Tower, we have AWS Config. Now what we're doing here is we are enabling those controls and guardrails in our environment to make sure that we maintain compliance. Now, in that second line, we have AWS Systems Manager. This is where you're going to be managing risk. And what that means is during those operations, what happens? And we're going to talk a little bit about Systems Manager a little bit down the line here. And the third line of defense is making sure that we have independent assurance. And for this, we use services like AWS Audit Manager and AWS CloudTrail. Those are going to be our 2 staple services for creating either audit reports or having access to those audit logs. Okay, let's talk about some of the preventative controls. So there's 3 sections here. We have manage, we have provision, and then the compliance. So in managing preventive controls, you're going to see things like AWS Control Tower, which is typically what we recommend be the first thing that customers in a multi-account environment roll out, because this really sets up those guardrails and preventative measures to not allow things to happen. So we can be preventative there. Secondly is provisioning. How do we provision resources? We can provision using Terraform. We can provision using AWS CloudFormation, which is our infrastructure as code. We can also implement compliance as code there. Also, many customers use Terraform to do this. And AWS Service Catalog is a service that will allow you to provision which services that your users have access to, so that it's not the Wild West in their environment. They have the minimum that they need to actually perform their job function. At the bottom, where we have compliance, you'll see AWS CloudFormation Guard and Open Policy Agent. We also call that OPA. Now, those are ways that we can write custom rules. OPA will help us write some custom rules, and CloudFormation Guard will allow us to kind of put measures in place for infrastructure to not be provisioned that in a way that we're not, that we don't want. Like if there are certain things that you want to allow or disallow via an infrastructure as code, that's where CloudFormation Guard is going to be very helpful. Now, what service is at the core of compliance for AWS? And that's going to be what you see here is AWS config. So AWS config not only does it run compliance on AWS, AWS config is also the foundation for many other services. So it feeds Security Hub, it feeds many other services that AWS uses. So how does it do it? So what config actually does is it records the resource in your environment, basically the configuration state of those resources in your environment, and then through the use of config rules or the concept of conformance packs, which is a bundle of config rules to meet a compliance framework, it is going to evaluate your resources based on the desired configuration you have. So what does that mean? That means, okay, let's say I need to have all of my S3 buckets encrypted when they are created. So we can deploy an AWS config rule into our environment that will go ahead and monitor our S3 buckets and check to see if they are indeed encrypted. And if they're not, then on the dashboard, we'll see that that bucket has been flagged as non-compliant. So we can either have an automation run and fix that issue, or we can have somebody go ahead and take a look at it. And we're going to demo that a little bit later. So Systems Manager. Systems Manager is really is a real powerhouse. There's so many different things that you can do it. We're actually putting something together called I didn't know Systems Manager could do that. It's a hashtag that will be on LinkedIn because there's so many pieces and so many nuances that you can do in Systems Manager. But one of the most powerful is automation. So we can use Systems Manager to automate the remediation of non-compliant resources. So again, if we go back to the example with an S3 bucket that is not encrypted, what we can do is we can attach an automation to our rule, which will go ahead and turn on the encryption on that S3 bucket when one is flagged for not having that encryption turned on. So Systems Manager, we can also, you can maintain patch compliance. We can use that to patch all of our VMs. It also works, in different, with different cloud providers. You can have a hybrid environment with Systems Manager. So it's a very, very useful tool. We can actually, any of your resources or your EC2 instances that are managed by Systems Manager, we can take a look at the file system, the registry, the password. So again, it's a very powerful tool, but we're gonna focus on the automation piece here in the demo. CloudTrail. Again, if we go back to that third line that I was talking about, which is gaining independent assurance, CloudTrail is gonna monitor and log your API calls. And this gets leveraged via AWS config so that you can see a resource timeline. So if we are taking a look at a resource that has been flagged as non-compliant, then we can go to that resource timeline and say, okay, John changed this configuration at 9 a.m. yesterday, and he's the one that turned off the encryption on that S3 bucket. And then you can also see, okay, it has been remediated, and now the encryption is turned back on. So CloudTrail works that way. And there's also a new service called CloudTrail Lake, which is an immutable platform. It's a little bit more managed. So for example, with CloudTrail, you can visualize your log data using Athena and QuickSight or other tools. But with CloudTrail Lake, the idea is that it's more managed. You don't have to use Glue. You don't have to optimize. It is all done for you. And you can use queries to query your compliance data with CloudTrail Lake. And again, very important. CloudTrail Lake is an immutable platform so that you can have that independent assurance. Security Hub. Security Hub is where you can go to get a single pane of glass view of your security posture. Now, Security Hub is one of those services that leverages AWS config rules under the hood. And they're linked very, very closely. In fact, you can even import your config data into Security Hub and visualize it all in one place. But the big difference there is Security Hub is for customers that want to get started a little bit faster. Maybe you are beholden to PCI DSS. Security Hub will allow you to roll that standard out into your environment very quickly in an automated fashion, where config gives us a little bit more flexibility to customize rules or to customize what we have deployed in our environment. I like to call it the Android and iPhone conversation, where one is more automated and out of the box, another one, like the Android, you have a little bit more flexibility and customization. Audit Manager is another great tool. This will help you prepare for audits. Now, how does this do it? Audit Manager will continuously monitor the evaluations of security and compliance services, and it will pull in all that data. So let's take an example. Let's say, go back to our PCI DSS example. That's something that you have to worry about. We can deploy that standard into our environment to monitor for those controls. And then in Audit Manager, we can have it pull in that data and create a report of our compliance posture throughout our organization in an automated fashion. And the other great thing that Audit Manager does is it shows you by control ID which config rules are monitoring for that control. So, control 11.0A for GXP will tell you that these 4 config rules are monitoring for that control. So you'll always have that evidence to show an auditor what the compliance state is there. And that is it for the talking stuff. We're going to get into the fun stuff now. So I will go ahead and pass this over to Andres. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. So we wanted to give you, and Craig did a very good job, a brief intro of some of the services that we're going to discuss. This is going to be interactive, so please stop me, ask questions, and be happy to talk about it. I know you came here because you're interested in compliance and auditing. My commitment to you is that after we're done here, you have a better understanding of how you can use all these different services to meet your compliance requirements. So if I haven't done that, let me know and we'll do it. We'll make it happen, right? Okay, so can we switch over, please? Sorry. All right, so let me just go back briefly to what Craig said. He talked about 3 lines, right? That first line is where you define your controls. When we're talking about compliance, that's the most fundamental part of it. And a control is something like, for regulatory purposes, you need to meet. Like if you use a service like S3, very popular service, right? You may be required that all your data is encrypted, right? That's a very common control, right? So how do you ensure that that is happening across multiple accounts and across multiple regions in an AWS environment? Where in that first line, we have AWS config, right? AWS config, like Craig explained, has this feature called config rules. And those config rules, basically you define a state of the resource where it should be. In this case, S3 bucket should be encrypted. And the rule will validate that all the resources across all accounts, all core regions, meet that requirement. If they're not, they're flagged as non-compliant. Okay, and you can take action on it. I think Craig mentioned this, right? The scale and velocity of the cloud forces you to automate a lot of this. It's impossible for you to be checking every single S3 bucket to see if it's encrypted. So what you can do with config, and I'll show you how that works, is you can deploy this rule and then automate the process of taking action on it. Because detecting it is just part of the story, right? You also need to do something about it. If it's not encrypted in this case, you need to make sure that either somebody follows up on it or that is automatically fixed, and we give you that option. So this is the config dashboard. I'm going to show you how you can define a control to restrict the ports in a security group that are allowed. That's a very common use case, right? So I'm going to walk you through the process. So basically, and what I'm going to show you is like step-by-step hands-on. When you're deploying this in hundreds of accounts and multiple regions, you want to do this automated with CloudFormation or Terraform, and deploy it across. But it's good to have a fundamental understanding of how it works so then you can go to the next step. So, you can just go ahead and say add a rule. There's 3 types of rules. There are managed rules. Those rules we curate for you, and they cover most of the common use cases for customers, like the S3 bucket example that I gave you. But there's also custom rules. And traditionally, custom rules are rules that are powered by Lambda. So you can evaluate anything you want, as long as you can define it in code in a Lambda function. So basically, you define the rule. You said, this is the code in Lambda that's going to validate that. That gives you a lot more flexibility. On the other hand, you have to get in your hands dirty and write some code, right? The third option is something customers were asking for, and we just released recently, is rules powered by CFN Guard. And this is a more simple DSL language, domain-specific language, that will allow you to write complex rules without writing code. It's easier. It's very easy to learn. We have very good documentation and examples on it. But for the purposes of this example, I'm just going to select manage rule, which is what we are doing here, because the rule that I want to show you, restricted common ports, is this rule right here, right? So this rule, what would allow me to do is define ports that should not be open on a security group across my entire environment. So I'm going to go ahead and say next. I give it a name. It's very simple. And down here, I can select when this rule is going to be evaluated. And it's kind of cool because if you evaluate, what resources are covered. And in this case, it's one specific resource. As you can see, it's security groups only. But then I can also, it's right here. So trigger when configuration changes. The way this rule works is that the resource is going to be evaluated only when there's a change to the security group, which makes it very efficient. Because if there has been no change, why would you want to check the security group, right? This is one of the big differentiators of config as a compliance platform to anything else, because the evaluation of the compliance state is done only at the change, and it's done very, very, very fast. So you don't have to run the scribe calls to the resource. You don't have to do any of that. Everything happens automatically. The only other thing I have to do here is define the ports that I want to track. And we provide some example ports. You can add more. These are some of the most common sensitive ports that you don't want to have open, blankly out there. So I'm just going to leave them there for the purposes of the example. And then that's it. I do a review, and I create it. Right now I have a rule. And what's going to happen is that this rule, required tags, it's going to come up in my console, as you can see here, and it's going to show me, oh, you have a bunch of non-compliant resources there. It detected it. I did a little bit of the cooking show here because it takes a couple minutes, right? But you get the point, right? So it detected it, and I'm going to go into here, and this is the detail of the config rule, restricted common ports. I can go in it, and I can see the ports that I'm blocking. And down here, it'll show me, oh my goodness, you're in trouble. You have a bunch of security groups that are non-compliant right now. So I have a quick view of those over here. And there's one that I want to show you, this guy right here, and I have it open here already. This guy, SG3B, blah, blah, blah. It's called SSH only, as you can see there, and it's non-compliant. I can actually view the data that we capture when it changed. And I can see here, oh, wait a minute, this guy has port 22 open to the world. That's not good, right? Actually, if I go to the actual console, and and I click on it, I can see it there. Oh yeah, this guy's in trouble, right? So what am I going to do? What am I going to do about it? One of the cool things that you can do with config is you can define a remediation action. Now, what is a remediation action? It's automation. That's the part where Craig was talking about systems manager as a platform for automation. Automation is super important when you address compliance at scale because it's not possible to handle this manually. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to fix everything automatically, right? You're not going to go blankly and say, oh, if you're not encrypted, I'm going to encrypt you. If you're public, I'm going to, because that, sometimes can break things. But what you do is you say, okay, how much can I automate and not have a human intervention? Can I cover 80% of my compliance requirements? Once I come up with that and I do as much as I can fully automated, then I may have 20% that I need human intervention for reviewing. So in those cases, you can do something with automation, with the automation platform. You can say, let's open a JIRA ticket, or let's open an ops item, and let's have a human follow up on it, make sure that everything is validated, and then we remediate it, right? And there's a couple of cool things that we provide you to automate that process also. What I'm going to show you now is how it works fully automated, okay? So I see here this restricted common port I'm sorry, I got to go back here. Ta-da, okay. So you see the rule here. This is the group that we're talking about. What happens is when I have defined a remediation action, and maybe I'll show you how to define the remediation action. That will be helpful. See, I have a JIRA one there, as you can see, and I have this one, and I'm going to open it in a tab here. And what I can do is I can go to Manage Remediation here. It'll take a second to load. But what this allows me to define, do I want this remediation to be automatic, as you can see on the top? Do I want it manual? And then I specify an SSM automation document that's going to perform the remediation. Now, SSM automation is super powerful. You can automate any API call, any execution on an EC2 instance. It can do very complex logic. It's super powerful. So what you can do is you can either decide, I'm just going to fix this thing by specifying that. And we have a bunch of sample remediation actions, specifying that one. Or you can say, here's a more interesting one. I am going to open a change control for this change, goes into Systems Manager, opens a change control request in Systems Manager, change control emails all the approvers. Nothing happens until all the approvers approve. Once the last approver approves, you can automatically remediate. Or you can have the same process, and then once everything is approved, you can create an ops item for an operator to come in and push the button if you want, right? Because it may be that you decide that, yeah, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it at a time where there's going to be very low impact, right? By the way, I mean, I can further automate this by saying you can use a feature of Systems Manager called Change Calendar that only executes the changes in the time frame that you define. So that's another option. So yeah, so this is what allows me to do that full automation. So let's go back and fix it. So remember I showed you how this has those open ports? Well, I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to say remediate, as you can see, right? Boom, remediate. We're going to give it a minute. Execution queue, you see it? All right, and it should work in a minute here. We'll go back here and show you how the magic happens, right? So the ports were removed automatically. So this is how you define controls, right? This is the first step. Now, a compliance framework is going to be made up of many, many, many controls, right? Some of those controls can be automated. The honest truth is some of those cannot be automated. So let's talk a little bit about how you can put together that group of controls that are going to help you achieve or automate as much as possible. Craig mentioned a little bit about conformance packs in his presentation. And what conformance packs is, these rules and these remediation actions, you can bundle them, you can package them into a single entity, a collection of rules and remediations that become a conformance pack to address specific compliance requirements. And the neat thing about conformance packs is, any real world environment running AWS infrastructure today is going to be made up of multiple accounts and multiple regions. So with conformance packs, you deploy from a single place into all your accounts and regions. So you define all your controls, you deploy, and then the rules that are deployed are immutable. So that means that if on a downstream account, one of the, on those accounts, there's an administrator, an individual that has full admin rights on that account. Once the rule is deployed, they cannot modify it, they cannot delete it, they can't touch it, which is very, very powerful if you think about it. Because from a compliance perspective, that's exactly what you want. You want the integrity of the data that you're collecting for compliance purposes. So what we've done is to help customers get started with conformance packs. We have about 60 conformance packs, sample conformance packs, to help you get started. They cover some of the most common compliance frameworks. If we go here to deploy a conformance pack, we can see the list here, okay? You have, let me see if I can see this better here. You have PCI, NIST, FedRAMP, as you can see there, HIPAA, some of the most common ones. Now these samples, and by the way, if you wanted to see them on GitHub, you can click here. It takes you to our documentation. And if you wanted to, for example, go look at FedRAMP Low, this is one of the most valuable things the conformance packs have, because it's a full mapping of the control ID with the individual controls that are implemented by the conformance pack. This is super useful because if you're tasked with managing compliance, you want a clear direction on, okay, what control it's equivalent to the rule that I'm deploying here. And then you figure out quickly if you're missing something. Oh, I'm missing validating this control. How do I do it? Can I automate it? So this helps you get started very quickly. If you wanted to see the actual conformance pack, remind me later, please. Anyway, this is the actual conformance pack in GitHub. This is how it looks, okay? This is that bundle of rules, as you can see, and in many cases, remediation actions. What you can do is you can take this, you can download it, and you can customize it, because you may find that what we included as a sample, you may need to add some stuff because it doesn't cover everything, your specific requirements, or you don't need as much, and you can take some things out. So that's how you customize. And actually, we encourage customers to remember that these are samples, that you're always going to have to do some customization of them. So once you deploy your conformance pack, which I'm not going to go through the process of doing that because, let me see, I think I have, where did I have my other, I remember now. I put it on Safari. There you go. Okay, so this is my next demo. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. All right, so I have some conformance packs deployed here on this account, okay? I have best practices for serverless. I have best practices for well-architected security pillar. There's a couple of samples that I deploy, and I want to show you how it looks once you deploy it. By the way, there is a special type of conformance pack called organizational conformance pack. Those two that you see at the bottom, those are organizational conformance packs, which means they're deployed across the entire org, multiple accounts. So when I go in there, I can see all the rules that are part of that conformance pack, and if they're compliant or non-compliant. I can go into the rule itself, and here's the interesting thing. If I had a remediation for that, I can initiate it from here just in the same way I showed you before. The only difference is everything is packaged and I'm covering multiple accounts, multiple regions. Now everything is centralized. But I have the same powerful automation here to address it, right? So these individual rules and remediation actions make your conformance pack. And you can see there all the resources there. And this is a big one. This is a big boy. So it has multiple pages here. Does anybody have any questions so far? Yeah.
So when you pick your compliance pack or
Conformance pack, yeah.
Conformance pack, let's say I pick a standard one for the EC2. Now, if you, as AWS, make changes to what that default is, how do I track that? Like, once I've already applied it and it's working, if you make changes to what that pack is and added something extra or taken something away, how do I track that changes to match up with what's...
Very good. So I'm going to repeat the question. So the question is, if you deploy a specific conformance pack, and then we make a change, AWS make a change of it, how does the customer keep track of that? How are they aware of that right now? That's a very good question. So the way you could do it right now is by subscribing to the GitHub repo. And then anytime there's a change, you'll get a notification and you'll see, because we keep them all on that GitHub repo. And just keeping in mind that these are samples, right? So what may happen, this is why this is a very good question, you'll see, oh, we updated, we added something to it, and then you look at it and you say, oh yeah, this doesn't apply to me, so I don't have to worry about it. Or, oh yeah, this is cool, I want to include it in my conformance pack, you can go ahead and add it. But that's a very good question, thanks for asking.
Is the recommended strategy to fork it and make your own package and not always use
Yes, exactly. I'm going to repeat the question. So is the recommended strategy to fork it or make your own one and not use the samples? Yes, that's correct. Because the samples are samples, right? And they're not, and there's a big warning in our documentation that says you need to customize it. Because I'm going to give you a very basic example. Password policy rotation. Our default there says 90 days. Your organization may have something different. There's a lot of organizations that are going now to a year. So it may be different. So yes, you need to customize it, yeah. And the other thing you're going to find out is you may run into the situation where, let's say you have to comply with PCI, but you also have HIPAA. You don't just want to deploy both. What you want to do is from those two, make one that meets all your requirements, right? There's a lot of benefits in doing that. It simplifies management, it simplifies the process of updating it, and it also could eliminate duplication of rules that you don't need. And then every control is addressed the same way. If you have to, it kind of complicates things a little bit. Yes, sir.
So the conformance packs, are they AWS managed rules, or are they mostly made up of pre-built ones that are mostly made up of custom rules?
Good question. So the question is, are conformance packs made up only of managed rules, or can you use custom rules, right? Is that the question?
Are they implemented as custom rules?
Okay. Or are they implemented as custom rules? The conformance packs we provide are all managed rules. Yes. But you can add custom rules to conformance packs. You can add your own custom rules that you have developed. You can deploy them. So they also work as part of conformance packs. So we have a lot of customers that are using conformance packs at scale that they combine both managed rules and custom rules. And this goes back to the point that every organization is different. So you may have some unique requirements where you need to, I need to evaluate this specific control. It's not part of the managed rules, so I'm just going to add it as a custom rule. You could definitely do that. Very good. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So for the AWS config, is that applicable or used at the organizational level?
Yes. It's AWS config usable on organizational level, yes. You can set up a delegated admin account in the organization for config, and from that account, you can deploy organizational rules and organizational conformance packs. Now, the easiest way that I recommend you to deploy conformance packs is using this. It's a CloudFormation template that has your conformance pack in it as an org conformance pack, organizational conformance pack. That makes it a lot easier, right? Because infrastructure as code, in this case, compliance as code, I like to call it. and then you deploy in one place, and it goes across your entire organization. And then there's one more benefit, is that your conformance pack is going to show as an organizational conformance pack. So, and we're not going to talk too much about this, but there's this concept of aggregators in config that collect all that compliance data into a single place. So when you deploy an organizational conformance pack, it's automatically, everything comes back to a single place for, so you can verify and validate everything from an organizational perspective. Let me go back here and then I'll come back to you. Yes?
I had two quick questions. One, you mentioned earlier about remediation and setting up those scheduled items. Can you also specify just like windows that you would allow those remediations? Say you have predefined maintenance windows and say just trigger only during these time frames. Can you do that?
Yeah, let me repeat the question. So the question is, for remediation actions, can you schedule them to happen during a specific window that you may have for maintenance? And the answer is yes, because what you can do is with automation, there's this concept of a change calendar. So you can define a change calendar, and the automation will only happen or be executed once it meets the criteria from the change calendar. Now it's interesting because you can also integrate into that change control. Right? So a lot of organizations do that. Okay, we detected a deviation, right? Okay, we need to address it. Let's fire off change control process. And then once everybody is approved, it's only going to happen during the window that you specify. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. Sir?
Yeah. And the organizational config rules, the beauty of that is, as an enterprise, accounts are coming and going all the time.
Correct.
And when an account appears in your organization, the stacks instances automatically.
Yes, very good. Yes, exactly.
You retire it, they go away.
Exactly. That's and I'm going to repeat that because that's a very good point. He just pointed out that in organizations with a conformance pack, when a new account is added, they automatically get the rules. And when you remove it, they go away. So it automates the process of implementing your controls across multiple accounts. Yes, sir.
So can you have exceptions to those rules? Like if something comes up, for the example that you had, Rule 20, Port 22 being blocked.
Right.
What if I have a bastion host and I have to have that open anyway? How do you handle that? Is there something where you would say this is an exception?
Right. So today we don't have that feature. That's a very common request. We are always looking for ways to make it better. What you can do today, it's kind of the opposite, right? You can deploy the rule so that it only applies to a subset of your resources by using tags. That is useful in some scenarios. And by the way, I should have repeated the question. The question was, can you create exceptions to the rules that are being deployed? And that's why I was explaining that today we don't support that. We support the opposite, which is target specific resources for the rule. But we're looking into building that feature. I don't have an ETA on it, but yeah, that's something that we are very interested in implementing. Yes, sir.
Reference the org being enterprise-wide. Is it possible, or do you support sub-orgs to where your federal accounts have different controls than your commercial accounts?
Yes, we support that on an account-by-account basis today. We are looking to support that eventually, targeting OUs. But today, the way you can do it is you can say, I want this conformance pack to apply to this subset of accounts. And I want this conformance pack to apply this other subset of accounts. Yes. There was a question here.
That was my question.
Excellent.
How to apply that to a specific use or not to all that?
Yeah, very good. So how do you apply conformance packs to specific use? We don't support OU yet. We have it on our roadmap, but you can do it with accounts.
No, it's all or nothing. And you can segregate accounts.
Yeah, you can specify individual accounts. Right, correct. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I'm curious about the automated remediation rules. For instance, you just demonstrated magically closing the port that is open against a rule. Is there a way to write, for instance, a Lambda that would do a more complex remediation, like, say, close the port and then write a nasty gram to the guy who owns the instance or something like that?
Yeah, you could do that in either on SSM automation. The question is, I'm sorry, I always forget to repeat the question. Can you do more complex remediations where you can fire up a Lambda, send an email, and do other steps? And the answer to that question is yes. Automation is super flexible. You can from its more simplest form, where you can define steps that make API calls, you can also write Python code in the automation document, or PowerShell code in the automation document that do very, very complex things. We have a sample that I wrote that what it does is, so you can understand the power of this platform. It extracts data from the API. That data comes back as a JSON object. And then I use pandas to create a data frame, okay, of that. I flatten the JSON, so I manipulate the data in a data frame with pandas, and then I take that data and I export it to an S3 bucket. So you can do very, very complex things with the automation document. That's a very good question. Thank you. Okay, cool. Let's keep on going. I have a couple more things that I want to show you. Those are awesome questions. So we talked about the rules, the remediations. We talked about conformance packs and how they are the foundation for you to define those controls. But another cool thing that Craig mentioned in his presentation is there's going to be a point, and then the first line is defining those controls. The second line is overseeing, which this kinds of cover, right, along with Security Hub. But there's going to be a point where you're going to get audited, right? An auditor is going to come knock on your door and say, okay, prove to me that you're indeed meeting the requirements for this compliance framework. What can we do there, right? And there are things that can help, like CloudTrail. You can obtain a lot of information that auditors require from that. But the other thing is, about a year and a half ago, we released a product that we are very excited about. It's called Audit Manager. And what Audit Manager does, and I'll quickly switch here, is it allows you to automate the process of collecting all that evidence, okay? It's not going to do the audit for you, all right? But it's going to help you. It's a tool that is going to help you simplify the process of collecting all that evidence. Because if you are being audited for environments that are running on AWS, a lot of the data that you need and the collection of that data can be automated and centralized. So Audit Manager is a platform that allows you to do that. Now, how does it work? So we provide you first with sample frameworks for the most common, again, compliance frameworks out there. So you start with that. Let's say that you are interested in PCI or HIPAA. So I'm going to go here to the framework library. And you can see we have right now 27 frameworks, and those are some of them. You start with a framework. Now, what is a framework? A framework, when you open it up, is a set of control, and no pun intended here, but control sets, right? It's a set of control sets. It's a group of control sets. A control set is those individual elements from an evidence collection process in a compliance framework, and they may be made up of multiple sources, okay? It may be that you are collecting information from CloudTrail, but at the same time, you're collecting information from config, and at the same time, you're collecting some manual evidence. That's an example, right? Manual evidence means there's no way of automating it. You're going to have to provide proof of that. So for example, do you have security awareness training implemented in your organization? That's a very common one. And you may have to just provide some documentation or validate it or stamp it and say, yeah, here's a document that proves that, my organization, we have implemented this. So that's a control set. That collection of control sets becomes a framework. Once you have that framework defined, you can take the ones that we provide, you can customize them, tweak them, which is what we recommend, make it fit for your requirements. You deploy it. Once you deploy it, at the moment of deployment, you need to specify, okay, which services, AWS services, do you want to cover with this assessment? So your organization may be using only RDS and EC2 or ECS or Dynamo. You specify those, or you say, no, I want to check everything. You can do that too. Then you specify, okay, which accounts in your organizations do you want to cover with this assessment? And this is good because this goes back to the question that was brought up. Not all accounts require the same type of compliance, don't have the same compliance requirements. So you may want to target specific accounts. You specify the accounts, and then you deploy your assessment. Oh, the other thing you do is you define audit owners. So the audit owners are the individual IAM roles or IAM users that are going to be in charge of reviewing controls, making sure everything looks fine and dandy, and then managing the whole overall process of collecting the evidence. You can also, but this is not part of the deployment, and I'll explain it in a minute. But once you define the audit owners, you deploy your framework. Once the framework is deployed, it's going to start collecting data. It takes about 24 hours to start collecting all the evidence. And then as the evidence is collected, it's going to be ready for you to start reviewing it, right? And let me show you how that looks. So we have a couple of assessments here that I've deployed. Okay, I have a SOC 2 assessment. By the way, this is the most popular one. So I'm going to go in it. And as you can see, I have 380,066 pieces of evidence on this assessment. All right, so I think I went overboard with what I defined there. But anyway, down here, I have those individual control sets that I was telling you, right? Let's go into one of them. Let's open up this one, okay? And I have CCP 1.1. I'm going to click on it, and I have documentation on the control details. By the way, this is a pre-built one, but you can build this yourself, and you can document it however you want. You had a question, sir?
We answered it just now.
Okay, very good. Very good. Yeah, so you can build your own ones. These are the ones that we provide, but you can build your own ones, document them, and put an action plan, testing information, all right? This one has been flagged as reviewed already, because I did that. But let's go to one, and I'll talk about this feature that is nagging me there. I'll explain it in a minute, once I explain how the controls work.
Quick question on the review part, can you trigger that to go back to a non-review state on a certain cycle, like quarterly access, a quarterly review of the control, say if it changed at all, or trigger like, if that control has changed at all, make it force a re-review by that owner that you were talking about a minute ago, or is that not really how this is intended to work? Just trying to make sure
Yeah, I think,
clear this.
I don't think you can change the status. You can, yeah, that's a good question. I don't think you can change the status of it. I can find out more for you. That's a good question. I'll give you my card at the end, and we can connect and follow up with you.
Is that the upper right-hand corner where it says update assessment status?
No, it doesn't let me, unless, I'm going to give you an example of one that I can update assessment status. This one here, update control status.
It's control status.
Yeah. Oh, no. I think I know why this is happening. Hold on one second. How much time I have? Okay, 9. Let me see. Yeah, it doesn't look like it let me change it. But I'll follow up with you, and we'll figure it out.
But you could use step functions to implement a custom workflow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Manipulates this based on your own company's workflow.
Yeah, this specific control is a manual control, as you can see here on the data source. I'm going to show you an example of a control that is automated. Let me see if I can find one. No, these are all manual, and maybe that's why I can change the control status. That one I haven't reviewed, so I could change it. But in the interest of time, because I'm not going to spend an hour looking for one here, what you will see here is, I can go here and just show you. Let me go to the control library and create a control and show you how that works. So let's create a custom control. All right, test 1. I'm going to give it a name. This is where I can write all that information. Somebody asked me about that, all those details. I can include testing information if I want. I can tag it. Okay, so this is where I can specify what is and I can have multiple data sources for one control. Like in this case, I can, test. I can say this is going to be automated, and these are the options that I have. I can do config as a source, automated source. I can do Security Hub. I can do CloudTrail, or I can do API calls. And the reason why we have API calls is because for some evidence, you need the snapshot of the resource. The auditor is not going to allow you to say, oh, it says compliant, or Security Hub says it's compliant. The auditor wants evidence, and that's why we have API calls. Same thing with CloudTrail. CloudTrail gives you the full snapshot of the call, and that's what the auditor wants to see. So that's why we have those options. The other option you have here is to make this manual. Now, this is manual, but like it was mentioned here, you can either upload the evidence to the console, but you can automate that, right? Like you can implement automated workflow because it's an API call. So you could write a Lambda or something that if a file is dropped into a bucket, it's taken and it's pushed into Audit Manager. You can take advantage of the manual option to do some additional automation, right? It's just that the source right now, it cannot be directly obtained from another service. But we're always improving this, and we want to hear from you guys. If there's something missing, let us know because we want to make this platform better. Okay, so go back here, and then I'll show you one more thing. So once my assessment is running, oh no, I kind of got ahead of myself here. Assessments. Okay, once my assessment is running, what I can do is let's see, this is generate an assessment report. So there's one step that I forgot to mention. So as controls are reviewed, there may be a control set that another team needs to review. You can delegate control sets to be reviewed by another individual. So you can select the control set and say, okay, I'm going to delegate this to this team, right? And this team goes in, and they'll be able to log into the console and do the control review. So control delegation is supported. Once that process is complete and you feel comfortable, or the auditor knocks on your door, the idea is that all these are reviewed and you have everything ready to go. After that, we're doing continuous assessment. The only thing you have to update is anything manual that maybe need to review every 3 months, every 6 months, wherever the frequency is. You just go upload it. And then at any moment, you can just click this button and say, generate assessment, give it a description, give it a name, and a bucket where it's going to go. And this is going to produce an assessment report. I'm not going to do that now because, we're like in the cooking show mode. And I think, this is one that I generated. Okay, and hold on one second. I wanted to go back here. I can download it, is what I wanted to show you. I can just click here. I can download it, and it comes down in a zip file. No, that's not it. What happened? What happened to my download? Download? Is it blocked? I guess it's being blocked. Yeah. Anyway, it basically downloads a zip file. That zip file has an index, and then it allows you to navigate through the index through all the evidence. Yes, sir?
When you generate a report, is there a way to automate it where it will just auto email to
Yeah.
various departments and they'll have it attached? Or do they have to come in and do the download you just showed?
Yeah, you can do that, not through the platform. You would have to you can build an automation document. Okay. That's a very good idea. We should do that. I love that. You can build an automation document that generates the assessment, and then emails it to somebody. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Slightly, I guess, backtracking a little bit, but in the beginning of the presentation, you guys mentioned, okay, you set up a new environment, here's all the security controls you can put in, Security Hub, all this other stuff. Do you have a prescribed path to retrofit this for an acquisition or a new environment that has to be come under compliance audit? Do you say, okay, phase 0, you set this up, set these rules up, phase 2, you do Security Hub, and then phase 3, we do these compliance packages.
Yeah.
Do you have some document that kind of gives you a roadmap for that?
Yeah, I mean, typically there is some documentation around that, but typically what you want to do, and this is why it helps to see it in that 3 lines model, where you're going to use, I would say, conformance packs as your first step to define those controls, and then you can use Security Hub, and there's some scenarios where that is very useful, but you can oversee with Systems Manager, you can oversee with Config2. And then the third one is if you need to meet audit requirements, then you use Audit Manager. But I think it's going to depend. Like every case is different. But I would. Are you using Control Tower? Because that's an awesome way of getting started, by the way. Yeah. And now Control Tower has features where you can bring in other accounts and things like that, which makes it more simple, because if you already have a conformance pack deployed, as you bring those accounts into the organization, they're just going to get the conformance packs automatically. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I can understand this if I'm developing on EC2 instances, it's my code, I want to audit it.
Mm-hmm.
But what if I'm using AWS SaaS services like AWS Connect, contact center services?
Mm-hmm.
Can I apply these against code that you all have written for your software, or is that closed code that I can't?
Well, and the question is, can you apply these to manage services like Connect and things like that? What's going to happen is when you're talking about services like that, there's the shared responsibility model, and that applies to auditing too. There's a part that we're going to take care of, and there's a part that you're going to take off, right? So if there are controls that apply to your Amazon Connect deployment, for example, that are in the shared responsibility model are part of your responsibility, then yes, you can do this. You can use this to assess those components, right? So for example, in Audit Manager, you can use the API call feature or the CloudTrail feature to assess configuration state of your Connect, and then use that in Audit Manager. Or you could write a custom rule either with CFN Guard, DSL, and config, make it part of your conformance pack that validates configuration details of your Amazon Connect deployment. Yes, so that's totally doable. Very good. All right, I have 18 seconds, so I'm going to have to say goodbye, but thank you very much for, let me see. Can you switch back to the presentation? I want to share, I have 8 seconds, I want to leave this up. Couple of resources if you want to learn more. It's a couple of GitHub repos. But thanks for coming. Please do fill out the survey, and we appreciate having you here today. Thank you very much.